You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your comments below. Be sure to smash that like button. So Saturday sucked. The trip to LA was phenomenal. I had just a spectacular time in Los Angeles. Everything was great until, obviously, the game. And it reminded me a lot of the trip to Lambeau Field in 2016, which was basically a carbon copy. Ask anyone that went. I was there. It was an absolutely magnificent day, a magnificent trip to one of football's hallowed grounds. And then the game started and LSU lost to Wisconsin. And in 2016, after LSU lost that opener to Wisconsin, the next day, Sunday morning before we were flying home, I sat in the lobby of my hotel and I got out my laptop and I wrote a column for a website I wrote for at the time. And then I reiterated the same thing on air that Monday. But I sat there and I wrote the column, and effectively the point I made was, as long as Les Miles is LSU's coach, they're never winning anything of significance again. And I was clear to make the point that it wasn't a reaction to one game. If you remember back in 2016, they got a lot of seniors to return. Tre'Davious White came back, and Ethan Posick came back, and Kendall Beckwith came back. And you had a really good junior class with Fournette and Jamal Adams and Malachi Dupree and Davin Gottschall. And that was really the team that should have been the one that made the run. And when they lost to Wisconsin, it exposed some fatal flaws, and you realized they weren't going to be able to make a run that year with that team. And you also coupled that with an athletic director that was aching to fire that coach and get his own guy in there, and it just wasn't going to work. They were done. And here today, I'm willing to say essentially the exact same thing. For as long as Ed Orgeron is LSU's head coach, they will not win anything of significance again. And the larger the sample size grows, the more clear it becomes that 2019, as spectacular as it was the outlier. Ed Orgeron lucked into a generational talent that carried the team to a national championship, but outside of that, he is a failure as a head football coach. The entire premise upon which this whole thing is built, Ed Orgeron as the CEO, where he's going to be the figurehead and hire great coordinators and delegate and recruit and be sort of the figurehead of the program. He is a failure at that in every one of those things. And he continues to show it over and over again. He's proven he's not a great leader. He's not a CEO, and that model won't work with Ed Orgeron. He is, first of all, incapable of making good hires. We should have seen this immediately with Matt Canada. Hired Matt Canada sight unseen. He liked the 45 points a game at Pitt, hired him. It blew up. He wanted to fire him within the first month of the season. Look at Alabama. One of their best defensive linemen is Fidarian Mathis, a kid from Louisiana. Do you remember why Fidarian Mathis didn't commit to LSU? Pete Jenkins was the defensive line coach, and I love Coach Pete, and he's the greatest defensive line coach in the history of football. But he was a man in his 70s, and that was going to be a short-term hire, and Nick Saban used that to negative recruit against LSU, and you lost a kid like Mathis. They hired Meatball Johnson. Why? Because it was convenient. He was right there. No power program would have ever made that their first hire. You remember when Jerry Sullivan, as much as we laughed at it, was actually a passing game coordinator? Before Joe Brady, Jerry Sullivan was a passing game coordinator. By the end of the season, they were like, Jerry, just get out of here. Like, get out of the booth. Like, basically, they kicked him out of the booth. Ensminger kicked him out of the booth. Didn't want him near him anymore. James Craig. You're literally in a lawsuit against James Craig. Bo Pelini. We know how that went. And now you got two more coordinator hires. You hired Durante Jones, and how much did I say this all offseason? As much as people wanted to fawn over it and believe that it was going to be the greatest hire ever, guy hadn't been a defensive coordinator since 2009, and that was at Division II Bowie State. Can't imagine why Chip Kelly was able to out-scheme a guy who hadn't been a DC in 12 years. Jake Peets has literally never called plays. But Joe Brady said, he's the guy. That's the problem with Ed Orgeron when it comes to hires. He is unable, he is incapable of, and has no confidence in his ability to make hires because he's never had to make good hires. He doesn't know what he's looking for. So he goes to people he trusts and says, who would you hire? And then he hires them. And then sometimes he hires people without interviewing them and doesn't think that's a problem. And further, doesn't think it's a problem to acknowledge in front of the media that you hired people without interviewing them. Like, the whole process is completely broken and flawed. And on top of not being able to hire and delegate, he doesn't understand what it means to be the face of a $100 million organization. And we saw another example of that this weekend. I mean, we could talk about taking pictures in bed with a woman. And listen, that's Ed Orgeron's personal life, and I'm not here to judge him in any way, for he is a single man and he could do what he wants. I have no judgment whatsoever. But the problem is, you have to have enough self-awareness to know not to take that picture. You have to have enough self-awareness to know why it's inappropriate to take shirtless pictures on the beach with women, or to be caught on video on a TikTok walking into a camp with these women. Why it's going to be received poorly when you're walking around LA the day before the game with another woman. Like, those are all things that in the public perception are going to reflect negatively on you and in connection with your program. Those are all problems, and he doesn't understand it. I mean, there's this great story about Derek Jeter, who was the king of New York City for 2 decades. And although he dated some of the most famous women in the world, nothing ever got out about his personal life, because anytime anyone went into his apartment, he had a basket by the door and he said, you drop your phone immediately. Nobody's getting anything out, because he was so conscious of his image and being the Yankee captain and the Yankee shortstop in New York City. Ed Orgeron doesn't understand that. And all of these things continue to reflect negatively on the program. And the athletic director, who did not hire him, I am telling you, is tired of it. He wants his head coach to be the figurehead of the entire athletic department. Look at the men that Scott Woodward has hired, from Chris Peterson and Jimbo Fisher. You all know the list. That's not Ed Orgeron, and it's never going to be Ed Orgeron. And then on Saturday, we have another example. He's walking into the Rose Bowl, and there's a father with his children, and he yells an expletive in their sissy blue shirt, and that has now gone viral. Have you seen that UCLA has made their official Twitter account, the header, a T-shirt that says Sissy Blue with the Jordan brand logo, and the U is the UCLA U. These are all, like, how do you not understand that when you're walking into a stadium with throngs of cameras videoing you walking in, why that is inappropriate? Because it's Ed Orgeron, and that's always been Ed Orgeron, and will always be Ed Orgeron. And he is a magnificent defensive line coach, and he has always been a very good recruiter. And as the defensive line coach and recruiter on staff at LSU, I loved that hire. But for these reasons, it's why I didn't like the hire when they made him the head coach, and why it's going to end badly and inevitably with him being fired. And I don't know if that's going to be tomorrow or midway through this season or after this season or whenever it may be, but whenever it comes, it will come ingloriously and unceremoniously, and it will be without LSU winning anything of significance again for as long as he is the coach, because he is incapable of building a championship program. And program, underscore, bold, exclamation, program. We've seen, look, there was someone on this station that took great offense to me earlier this summer saying Ed Orgeron, in a one-off, Larry Coker his way to a championship. Use Larry Coker, use Gene Chizik, use whoever you want. There are examples of coaches who won championships in spite of themselves. They either inherited a great team, they got a great transcendent player like Gene Chizik did with Cam Newton, and 2 years later was fired. That is the inevitable path that LSU is heading with Ed Orgeron. This team has massive flaws, and I have told you from the beginning of this offseason, if this team loses 5 games, then Ed Orgeron is going to be fired. I think you would probably agree with me. They're barreling toward a 7-5 or 6-6 season because of some of these flaws. And it's going to end inevitably with Ed being fired. We will always be grateful for the 2019 season. It was absolutely amazing and enthralling in every piece of it. But yet again, Ed Orgeron's LSU Tigers have been exposed. They've now lost 6 of their last 11, and they allowed over 30 points again. He can't do it. He just doesn't know how to build a program, a championship program, and sustain success. And if you can't do that at LSU, you can't be the head coach at LSU, and he won't be much longer. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.